The siren sliced through the stillness of our street, not in a panicked wail, but in a slow, controlled rhythm, the kind that makes people step out onto their porches and look twice. A military ambulance, bright white and polished, rolled to a precise stop in front of my parents' house. The gold seal of the United States Army Medical Corps caught the late afternoon sun and flashed like a signal. 2 medics stepped out first, crisp and focused. Then I followed. Dress blues pressed sharp, cap aligned perfectly, white gloves standing out against the black leather of my service bag. Every neighbor within sight froze, the entire moment framed in that golden light. My parents stood on the porch, the screen door hanging half open, their faces caught somewhere between disbelief and anger. "Jennifer," my mother began, her voice rising, "what is this?" I didn't answer her. I looked past them, straight into the dim hallway of the house I had grown up in, and spoke clearly. "I told you I'd come for him." 2 days earlier, none of this had been on my mind. No ambulance, no uniforms, no public confrontation. I had been sitting in my kitchen with a cup of black coffee when my phone rang. It was my cousin, Mark. His voice was tight, rushed. "Jenny, did you know Grandpa's been sick? Like, really sick?" My grip tightened around the mug. "No, nobody told me. What's going on?" He hesitated. "He's barely eating. Bad cough. Looks like he's dropped at least 20 pounds. I went by yesterday, but your parents wouldn't let me in. Said he was resting." Resting? The word didn't sit right. I called my parents immediately. Dad answered after a few rings. "Jenny, everything okay?" "No, Dad, I just heard Grandpa's sick. How bad is it?" There was a pause. Then his voice flattened. "He's old, Jenny. What do you expect?" "That's not an answer," I said. Mom's voice cut in from the background, sharp and impatient. "We've got it handled. He's staying home. No hospitals, no doctors." "What do you mean, no doctors?" "He's tough," Dad replied. "Dragging him around for tests will just make things worse. We've decided." "You've decided? Not him, not me." I was the only other person in the family with legal authority, a medical proxy Grandpa had signed 3 years ago after Grandma passed. "Let me talk to him," Mom snapped. "Call back next week." Next week? They were willing to let him sit there untreated for another week? After the call, I went straight to my file box and pulled out the folder Grandpa had given me. On top sat the notarized proxy form. Beneath it, a letter in his steady handwriting. "Jenny, if I can't speak for myself, I want you to do it. You've got the spine and the sense for it." I stared at the words. The Army had trained me to move fast, to coordinate under pressure, to act when others hesitated. Now, those same skills weren't for a battlefield, they were for him. That night, I made the call. "Morales," I said when he answered, "you still running medical transport?" "Why?" "I need a favor. I've got a patient not getting care. I have legal authority. I need this done right." There was a pause, then, "Send me the paperwork." By morning, everything was set. Time, team, transport, a military ambulance, 2 medics, and me in full uniform. Because if my parents wanted a fight, I wasn't going to lose it on their ground. Sleep barely came that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandpa alone in that dim living room, curtains drawn, TV flickering across his face. I heard my mother's voice again. "Grandpa stays home, no hospitals." The next morning, I called again, hoping for a different answer. "Morning, Jenny," Dad said casually. "I'm coming over today," I said. "I'm taking Grandpa to the doctor." "You're not," he replied immediately. "He's sick, Dad. You can't just—" Mom cut in sharply. "We said no. He's fine. He's old. Hospitals won't change that." It wasn't what she said. It was how easily she said it. No concern, no hesitation, just dismissal. "You don't get to decide that alone," I said quietly. "Yes, we do," Dad said. "We live here. You're off doing your army stuff." That phrase hit harder than anything else, like everything I had done meant nothing. "You think I don't care?" I asked. "It's not about caring," Mom said. "It's about reality." Reality. I had heard that word before in quiet battlefield conversations, when medics knew a soldier wasn't going to make it. Comfortable. Reality. Words people use when they've already given up. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from anger. If they thought that was enough for him, they didn't know me at all. I sat at the table and built a plan, step by step, like any operation. Transport, documentation, timing, witnesses, control. This wouldn't be quiet. If it had to be public, then it would be public. Morales confirmed the time. Thursday, 1600. "Perfect," I said. "You ready for the fallout?" I looked at Grandpa's letter again. "I'm ready." I gathered everything. Copies of the proxy, VA card, military ID, leave orders, medical notes. I called Dr. Patel. She didn't hesitate. "Bring him in. We'll be ready." The morning of the operation, I had my uniform pressed again. I looked at my reflection. Calm, focused. Calm meant control. That night, I laid everything out carefully. The uniform, the documents, the plan. It wasn't just preparation, it was armor. By afternoon, I was in position, 1 block away, watching the house. Curtains drawn, minimal movement, controlled environment. At exactly 15:55, the ambulance arrived, precise, controlled. Morales stepped out. "We're ready." I handed him the red folder. "We do this by the book." We approached together. The medics rolled the gurney behind us. The screen door opened before we reached the steps. "What do you think you're doing?" my mother demanded. "We're here for medical transport," I said evenly. "I am his medical proxy." "No," she snapped. "He stays here." Morales stepped forward, placing the clipboard between the door and her hand. "Ma'am, please review the authorization." Dad moved up beside her, angry now. "You can't just—" I held up the documents. "We can, and we will." Silence spread across the yard as neighbors watched. "Where is he?" I asked. "Living room," Dad muttered. We walked inside. The house felt heavier than I remembered. Stale air, closed space. Grandpa sat in his chair, thinner than I'd ever seen him. But when he looked at me, that spark was still there. "Jenny," he said. "I'm here," I said softly. "We're taking you to the hospital." He nodded. "About time." The medics moved efficiently, helping him up, securing him carefully. From the hallway, my mother's voice rose again, but it didn't matter anymore. We brought him outside. Fresh air hit his face. "Feels good," he said quietly. We secured him in the ambulance. Oxygen, vitals, everything steady. Before getting in, I turned back. "You can follow if you want, but this stops today." Neither of them answered. Inside the ambulance, I sat beside him as the engine hummed and the street faded behind us. "You didn't have to fight this hard," he said. "Yes, I did," I replied. At the hospital, everything moved fast. Dr. Patel was already waiting. Tests began immediately. Oxygen, blood work, imaging. "You were right to bring him in. This could have turned fatal." I stepped outside briefly and called Morales. "He's stable, thanks." "You did the hard part." But I wasn't done. My parents were waiting inside. "You can see him soon, but first we talk." The advocate joined us. Legal terms, clear instructions, no interference. For once, my parents had nothing to say. I went back to Grandpa. He looked better already. "You're safe," I said. He squeezed my hand. "Safe is good, but truth matters more. Don't stop." And I wouldn't. By evening, the monitors showed steady improvement. Oxygen rising, heart rate stable, antibiotics working, slowly but surely. Dr. Patel reviewed the scans. Pneumonia, fluid buildup, treatable. Treatable. The word echoed. I asked her quietly, could this have been prevented? She nodded slightly. The severity could have been reduced. Delay made it worse. I absorbed that without reacting. Can you document everything? I asked. She understood immediately. Of course. In the hallway, the advocate stood ready with notes. Conference at 7 p.m., she said. You'll lead. I sent a message to my parents. No emotion, no explanation, just time and place. Family conference. 7 p.m. Conference room B, mandatory. They read it. The bubbles appeared, then disappeared. Fine. At 18:58, I stepped into Conference B. Fluorescence hummed overhead. The table was laminate wood, the chairs too light for the gravity in the air. Dr. Patel sat at one end, chart open. A charge nurse named Lewis set a pitcher of water and a small tray of paper cups in the center, like peace offerings for a meeting that wasn't going to be peaceful. Miss Holloway took a seat beside me, pen ready. My parents came in at 19:02, their lateness a habit they wore like a privilege. Mom's mouth was a straight line, Dad's was fixed in neutral, the gear he preferred when truth approached. They sat across from me as if a border ran down the middle of the table. We'll begin, I said. Doctor? Dr. Patel folded her hands, voice crisp. Mr. Hall presented with hypoxia, fever, and radiographic evidence of pneumonia complicated by fluid retention, likely related to cardiac strain. We initiated oxygen, antibiotics, and a diuretic, he responded. In my medical opinion, delay in seeking care increased his risk significantly. She let the words hang long enough for their weight to register. This is treatable, she continued, but it required treatment. Dad cleared his throat. We were trying to keep him comfortable. Nurse Lewis spoke gently but firmly. Comfort is pain management and rest after evaluation. Comfort is not isolation and guesswork. Mom's eyes flashed. You don't know what we deal with at home. Miss Holloway leaned forward, tapping her pen once. That's why there are caregivers, home health nurses, facilities, and family. What you don't do is unilaterally bar access to medical care. He has a designated proxy. You ignored that. I slid the proxy form across the table. He signed this 3 years ago. You saw it. You knew. Dad looked down. Mom didn't. He's old, she said. Hospitals are hard on old people. Pneumonia is harder. Dr. Patel said, not unkindly, denial is hardest of all. Silence pressed in. The clock on the wall clicked forward. Somewhere in the building, a code was paged overhead, the burst of urgency reminding everyone present what real emergencies sound like. Miss Holloway broke the quiet. Here's the administrative side. As of now, all decisions regarding Mr. Hall's care will go through his proxy, your daughter. You will not obstruct transport, appointments, prescriptions, or visits. If you do, we will file with Adult Protective Services. Additionally, if there's evidence that medical delay was used to influence financial outcomes, that becomes a separate matter. Mom's chin jerked. Financial outcomes? I held her stare. Cut the theater. I saw the certified mail on the hall table last month, the insurance policy renewal, the property tax notice, the household transfer pamphlet you left next to Grandpa's chair like it was a magazine. Dad shifted. You've been going through our mail now? I've been seeing what you've been ignoring, I said, and so will everyone else. Mom finally looked away. I didn't miss it. People think guilt is a shout. It's a flinch. Dr. Patel closed the chart with a soft thud. He'll remain inpatient for at least 48 hours. If he meets criteria, we'll transition to step-down, then discharge with home health and follow-up cardiology. He'll also be evaluated for pulmonary rehab. Discharge my care, I said. If he doesn't return home with me, he goes to a place where I control access. Nurse Lewis nodded. We'll document that. We can arrange training for you on the meds and home oxygen if needed. I turned to my parents. You will bring his personal items from the house tomorrow: ID, wallet, glasses, phone. If you want to be included, you show up with those and with respect. If not, stay out of the way." Dad opened his hands, a gesture I recognized from decades of negotiations over smaller things: soccer practices, holiday schedules, lawn repairs. "Jenny, this is getting theatrical." "No," I said, "this is getting accountable." Miss Holloway slid a simple agreement across the table, a typed page with 3 lines and 2 signature blocks. "We agree not to interfere with the medical proxy. We will cooperate with the care plan. We acknowledge that failure to do so may be reported." They signed not because they were sorry, but because their options were shrinking. Sometimes you settle for the right outcome before you chase the right feeling. After the meeting, I walked them to the glass doors. Evening had drawn a deep blue over the parking lot. Sodium lamps buzzed like a faraway storm. "You can see him now," I said. "Keep it calm, keep it brief." Mom paused with her hand on the handle. "You're making a spectacle of this." I met her eyes. "No, I'm making a record." She pushed through the door without answering. Dad hesitated. "We love him," he said, as if love were a receipt you could show after a purchase went wrong. "Then show up at 10 a.m. with his things," I said, and with a better definition of the word. I went back to room 3A. Grandpa's eyes were closed, the lines around them softer now that the oxygen was doing its quiet work. I pulled a chair close and sat. The fatigue settled across my shoulders, but underneath it was something steadier than exhaustion, purpose cooling into resolve. He opened one eye, like we were sharing a secret. "How bad was the meeting?" "Not the worst I've ever been in," I said, "but it moved the ball." He smiled, then coughed a smaller cough than earlier. "Moving the ball's how you score." I squeezed his hand. "Tomorrow, I'm going to do something else." "What's that?" "Make sure the people who looked away can't," I said. "Not anymore." He nodded, like a general approving a plan he'd known I'd make. "Do it with grace," he said softly, "but do it." "I will." I stepped into the hallway and texted 3 neighbors: a pastor who ran the food pantry, the commander of the local VFW post, and Morales. The message was short: Saturday, 11 a.m., Hospital Garden, honoring a veteran. Spread the word. If my parents wanted Grandpa hidden in a dark living room, I would bring him into the light in front of everyone. Not to humiliate them for the sake of humiliation, but to restore what they had quietly taken: witness, gratitude, truth. And when they stood there, facing what they tried to bury, I would give them one last chance to choose the right side of their own story. Saturday came with a sky so clear it felt staged, the kind of blue that makes flags look brighter. The hospital's courtyard garden had been swept, the flower beds edged, the benches wiped down. A volunteer crew from the VFW hung a fresh stars and stripes between 2 maples. It moved in the breeze like it had something to say. I wheeled Grandpa out at 10:58. He wore his best jacket, navy blue, brass buttons polished to a soft gleam. On his lap, folded with ceremonial precision, was his old army blanket, the one he'd kept since Korea. His oxygen cannula trailed to a small portable tank, Morales steering the cart with the same steady hands he used in the field. People had come. Not just the neighbors I'd invited, but more members from the VFW, a group from the food pantry, even kids from the high school he'd spoken to years ago about service and sacrifice. They lined the path, hats over hearts, and there, just behind the crowd, were my parents. Mom's arms crossed tight, Dad's face set in that guarded neutral again. But they were here. They could see what they tried to pretend didn't exist. The chaplain from the VA started the short ceremony. He spoke of duty not as a word, but as a life lived for others, of how illness doesn't erase worth, and how the measure of a community is how it treats its elders when they can no longer stand on their own. I stood beside Grandpa's chair, letting the words land on him like sunlight. Then Morales stepped forward. "Sergeant Major Hall," he said, voice caring, "on behalf of those you served with and those who came after, we thank you." The crowd rose to attention, and as if on cue, every veteran present, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, saluted. The sound of boots snapping together echoed off the brick walls. I turned to my parents. "Step forward," I said, quietly enough for only them to hear. Mom's eyes narrowed. "This is not optional," I cut in. "This is where you choose." For a long moment, they didn't move. Then, Dad stepped out first. Mom followed, stiff like every step was a negotiation with herself. They came to stand before Grandpa. "You're going to kneel," I told them, "because respect is more than a feeling, it's an action." There was a murmur in the crowd. People weren't sure what they were seeing or if they were meant to, but the space around us felt charged, like the air before a storm breaks. Dad knelt first. His right knee hit the stone with a muted thud. Mom hesitated, eyes darting to the onlookers, but then she lowered herself, careful not to wrinkle her skirt. Grandpa looked at them both, his expression unreadable at first. Then he nodded, once slow. "That's better," he said. I leaned down so only they could hear. "This isn't punishment. This is clarity. You will not forget this, and neither will I." They both stared at the ground, but I saw the color rise in my mother's cheeks. My father swallowed hard. I straightened, letting the silence do the rest. Then I turned to Morales. "Let's finish this right." Morales barked, "Present arms," and every veteran snapped their salute again. This time, my parents stayed kneeling until the last hand dropped. Afterward, people came up to shake Grandpa's hand, tell him stories they remembered from decades ago. The high school kids gave him a card they'd all signed. The chaplain offered a prayer. My parents hovered at the edge, no longer in control of the space, no longer able to hide behind closed doors and drawn curtains. When the crowd thinned, I wheeled Grandpa toward the hospital entrance. He was tired, but smiling faintly. "You pulled it off," he murmured. "Not for the sake of pulling it off," I said, "for the sake of making sure they'll never forget." He patted my hand. "They won't, and maybe one day they'll understand. I don't know if they ever will, but I do know this. Justice isn't always about courtrooms or laws. Sometimes it's about creating a moment so clear, so unshakable, that the people who need to remember can't rewrite it later." If you've got someone in your life who stood for you when it was hard, stand for them when it's your turn. Do it loud if you must, quiet if you can, but do it in a way they'll never forget. Because dignity isn't given, it's defended. And love isn't a word, it's the act of showing up even when you've been told not to.